What happens when a movie goes so far off the rails that entire countries scramble to lock it away? The 1970s was the wildest decade in film history, a time when directors didn't just break the rules, they torched the rulebook and danced on the ashes. But how far is too far? Which films had censors sweating, politicians raging, and audiences gasping for air? Stick around as we count down the 15 most controversial 1970s movies that got banned, some for reasons you'll see coming, others that'll leave you reeling. Spoiler. It's not just the blood and guts you'd expect. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. There are controversial movies, and then there's A Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick's acid-laced Molotov cocktail tossed into the middle of polite society. Set in a near-future England that looks like a punk rock fever dream, the film follows Alex DeLarge, a young thug with a taste for Beethoven and ultra-violence. The opening scenes don't just nudge the boundaries, they shatter them, with Alex and his droogs rampaging through a cityscape that feels both surreal and disturbingly real. Kubrick's film was accused of glamorizing violence, seducing audiences with hypnotic visuals while pelting them with scenes of beatings, sexual assault, and all-out anarchy. The movie triggered an absolute moral panic in the UK, where newspapers blamed it for copycat crimes and politicians called for heads to roll. Kubrick himself received death threats so severe that he pulled the film from British theaters, a move nearly unheard of in movie history. The ban lasted nearly 30 years, but the outrage didn't stop at the channel. A Clockwork Orange was banned or cut in Ireland, Singapore, Spain, South Africa, and more. Its iconic imagery, Alex's false eyelash, the milk bar, the warped version of Singin' in the Rain, was burned into pop culture, even as it was blacklisted from screens worldwide. Some called it a masterpiece of social commentary. Others said it was cinematic poison. Decades later, A Clockwork Orange is still the yardstick for controversy, a film that dared to ask if we can ever truly cure evil, or if we just end up becoming monsters ourselves. It's not just a movie, it's a cultural firestorm that never really cooled off. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. No, your eyes aren't deceiving you. The most banned movie of the decade is the one with almost no blood. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre took the world's deepest fears and carved them up for all to see. When Tobe Hooper unleashed Leatherface onto unsuspecting audiences, he wasn't just making a horror film, he was orchestrating a sensory assault. The shrieks, the chainsaw roar, the grindhouse grime. Hooper turned a road trip through rural Texas into a waking nightmare that felt way too real. Censors around the globe practically threw themselves between this movie and their audiences. The UK banned it outright. Sweden, Australia, Brazil, and several other countries followed suit. Even in the US, many theaters refused to show it, and local authorities raided screenings. The reason? The atmosphere was so relentlessly oppressive, the violence so convincing, that viewers were convinced they'd seen buckets of gore, even though, by today's standards, the film is surprisingly restrained. But context is everything. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre hit at a time when America's innocence was unraveling, post-Manson, post-Vietnam, when the myth of safe rural America was dying. Hooper tapped into something primal and ugly, hinting that the real horror wasn't the chainsaw, but the sense that no one was coming to save you. Parents called for its destruction, politicians condemned it, and yet audiences lined up, passing on stories like urban legends. Far from a cinematic curiosity, this film reshaped horror forever. The bans only increased its reputation. Today, Texas Chainsaw is a legend, a fever dream that still makes viewers squirm, even without a river of fake blood. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. If you're squeamish, buckle up. I Spit on Your Grave didn't just break taboos, it bludgeoned them and left them in a ditch. This low-budget shocker tells the story of Jennifer Hills, a city writer who retreats to the country for inspiration and instead endures one of the most brutal assaults ever put on film. What follows is a bloody, calculated revenge spree that had audiences and censors absolutely reeling. Upon its release, the film sparked instant outrage. Critics didn't just pan it, they torched it. Roger Ebert famously called it a vile bag of garbage. But the controversy didn't end with the critics. Censorship boards in the UK, Ireland, Australia, Norway, and Germany slapped it with bans, sometimes even threatening to prosecute anyone who distributed or screened the film. In the US, it played in drive-ins and grindhouses, becoming the stuff of urban legend. The movie's director, Mir Zarchi, claimed he wanted to show the horror of sexual violence unflinchingly, believing that sanitized depictions were more dangerous than the raw, ugly truth. But many saw it as exploitative, arguing that its extended scenes of brutality were more about shock than empathy. Feminist groups protested, lawmakers fumed. Yet, like so many banned movies, I Spit on Your Grave refused to stay buried. Over time, it found a cult following, inspired a remake and sequels, and continues to ignite heated debate. Is it exploitation or a fierce, if flawed, scream against violence? Whatever side you land on, one thing is certain: nobody forgets their first viewing. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's debut wasn't just controversial, it was radioactive. The Last House on the Left exploded onto screens with all the subtlety of a Molotov cocktail. Inspired by the violent headlines of the Vietnam War era, Craven crafted a movie that felt like it was pulled straight from the nightly news. A savage, nerve-shredding tale of abduction, assault, and revenge. The plot is deceptively simple. Two teenage girls are kidnapped and brutalized by a gang of criminals. But the real gut punch comes in the aftermath, as the parents of one victim discover the truth and unleash their own brutal justice. The violence is unrelenting, the tone is bleak, and the camera lingers long enough to make you squirm. Audiences weren't prepared, and neither were the censors. The bans came swiftly and forcefully. The UK and several other countries refused to allow screenings. In others, the film was chopped to ribbons. In the US, drive-ins and seedy theaters embraced it, and word of mouth gave it a mythic aura. Protesters marched. Critics vomited, literally, in some cases. For many, it was the end of decency in American cinema. But here's the twist. Craven always claimed the film was a critique of violence, not an endorsement. He wanted to show the consequences, not glorify the act. In a perverse way, the backlash made the movie even more infamous. Today, The Last House on the Left is seen as a cornerstone of American horror, proof that sometimes the things we most want to ban are the very ones we can't stop watching. Straw Dogs, 1971. Straw Dogs didn't sneak into controversy, it kicked down the door. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, a filmmaker already infamous for pushing the envelope, this psychological thriller follows David Sumner, a mild-mannered mathematician who moves to rural England with his wife, seeking peace. Instead, they find hostility, violence, and a slow-burning menace that erupts into a full-on siege. What sent censors into meltdown was a prolonged, deeply disturbing assault scene, layered with ambiguity that critics still argue about. Was it exploitation or an unflinching look at the monstrous side of human nature? The question alone was enough to earn the film outright bans in the UK, Ireland, Norway, and beyond. Even when it wasn't banned, it was often released in butchered versions, missing key scenes that, paradoxically, made the rest of the film feel even more disjointed and unsettling. Audiences were divided. Some hailed Peckinpah for exposing the myth of the civilized man. Others decried him for glamorizing sexual violence. Feminist groups and moral guardians protested in droves, while the director shrugged off the outrage with typical Peckinpah bravado. For years, Straw Dogs was spoken about in hushed tones, the kind of film you had to seek out at midnight screenings or on bootleg VHS. Today, it remains one of the most controversial movies of the decade, a razor-wire meditation on violence, masculinity, and the illusion of safety. Whether you see it as a masterpiece or a cinematic line crossing, one thing's for sure: Straw Dogs left no one untouched. Sweetbacks Badass Song, 1971. If you think the Hollywood establishment is hard to shake, meet Melvin Van Peebles, a one-man wrecking crew who bulldozed through every barrier in his path. Sweetbacks Badass Song didn't just rattle censors, it sent shockwaves through the entire system. Van Peebles wrote, directed, produced, starred in, and even wrote the soundtrack for this relentless odyssey about a black man on the run from the police. The tagline, "Rated X by an all-white jury." If you missed the message, don't worry, America's censors sure didn't. Released at the height of civil rights tension, the film's raw depiction of police brutality, explicit sex, and black empowerment put it squarely in the crosshairs. The Motion Picture Association of America slapped it with an X rating, and cities across the US, especially in the South, refused to screen it. Outside the States, countries like Canada and the UK also issued bans or heavy cuts, fearing it would spark unrest or offend community standards. But Van Peebles wasn't just breaking rules for shock value. He was building a new cinematic language. The movie's grainy, guerrilla style, rapid-fire edits, and gritty realism became the blueprint for the entire blaxploitation genre. Sweetback was unapologetic, loud, and relentless, qualities that rattled the establishment and galvanized Black audiences. Black Panther chapters across the country promoted the film, calling it required viewing for anyone who wanted to understand the struggle. Financial backers fled, theaters braced for riots, and yet Sweetback made millions. Without Hollywood's blessing, it forced the industry to reckon with voices and stories it had long ignored, blasting open doors for films like Shaft and Superfly. Some called it dangerous, some called it genius, but everyone knew it was revolutionary. This wasn't just a movie, it was a cinematic riot. And when the smoke cleared, Hollywood would never be the same. Pink Flamingos, 1917, 2. If you thought band movies were all blood, guts, and violence, think again. Pink Flamingos is what happens when you hand the camera to John Waters, the king of midnight movie madness, and dare him to offend literally everyone. Set in a filthy Baltimore underbelly, this film is a parade of outrageousness, following Divine, drag legend, underground icon, as she fights to retain her title as the filthiest person alive. It's not the violence that got Pink Flamingos blacklisted, but the unrelenting gross-out spectacle. Unsimulated sex, nudity, a chicken scene that had animal rights activists howling, and of course, the now infamous dog poop finale. The censors lost their collective minds. Australia, Norway, and Switzerland banned it. Canada arrested theater owners. Even in the US, the film played in secrecy, only surviving through midnight screenings, word of mouth, and an army of cult fans who craved something way weirder than Hollywood's usual fare. Critics were horrified and fascinated in equal measure. The establishment called it sick, perverse, and a new low for cinema. Waters, naturally, wore these insults as badges of honor. He was making art for the outcasts, the weirdos, and anyone who felt suffocated by respectability. But here's the wildest part. Pink Flamingos didn't just get banned, it became a cultural phenomenon. It gave rise to the bad taste movement, inspired countless underground filmmakers, and turned Divine into an icon of outsider art. You can laugh, you can gag, you can protest, but you can't ignore it. Pink Flamingos proved that sometimes the most banned movies are the ones that matter most to the people who feel banned by society. Dirty Harry, 1971. You know a movie has hit a nerve when even the critics seem a little scared of it. Enter Dirty Harry, the movie that made Clint Eastwood a one-liner legend and left censors reeling. The film follows Inspector Harry Callahan, a cop so tough he makes his own rules, tracking a Zodiac-inspired killer through San Francisco. With its gritty violence and infamous "Do you feel lucky, punk?" line, the film practically dared authorities to try and stop it, and many did. Dirty Harry was banned in Finland, with authorities claiming the movie glorified vigilantism and undermined the justice system. In the UK, the film was heavily scrutinized and cut for its graphic content. Even in the US, it stirred national debate. Was Harry a necessary antidote to urban chaos, or a fascist fantasy that made police brutality look cool? Critics slammed it as bigoted and dangerous, and civil rights groups protested outside screenings. But for every pearl clutcher calling for a ban, there were legions of fans who saw Harry as a folk hero, a lone wolf taking on the scum when the system failed. The controversy was pure rocket fuel for box office receipts. Dirty Harry became a phenomenon, spawned sequels, and changed the face of action cinema. Today, the film stands as both a product of its time and a timeless debate about law, order, and just how far we'll go for justice. It's a story of boundaries, how we draw them, who's allowed to cross them, and what happens when the line between good and bad gets as blurry as the city lights at midnight. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Ready for a banned cartoon that made Disney executives sweat bullets? Meet Fritz the Cat, the world's first X-rated animated feature, directed by counterculture provocateur Ralph Bakshi. Based on the underground comics by Robert Crumb, Fritz is a wild, unfiltered romp through 1960s America, packed with sex, drugs, violence, and every taboo you could cram into 78 minutes of hand-drawn chaos. The plot follows Fritz, a cynical, feline college student, as he plunges headlong into orgies, race riots, revolutionary politics, and psychedelic mayhem. Nothing is sacred, nobody is spared. Censors lost their minds, banning the film in the UK and Norway, slapping it with an X rating in the US, and sparking protests in cities everywhere. Even the cartoon's creator, Robert Crumb, was horrified at how far Bakshi pushed the envelope. But while some saw Fritz the Cat as an abomination, others saw a savage satire of American hypocrisy. The film tackled racism, police brutality, Vietnam, and campus unrest, all with a wink and a middle finger. It made parents gasp and teens cheer, pulling in millions at the box office and proving that cartoons weren't just for kids. Over time, Fritz the Cat has become a counterculture classic, a snapshot of a wild era, and a reminder that sometimes the most outrageous voices are the ones that stick around the longest. Ban it, shame it, protest it. Fritz just keeps grinning, giving the world the finger with a Cheshire Cat smile. Faces of Death 1978. Some movies test the boundaries of good taste, and then there's Faces of Death, a film that kicked down the boundaries and dared you not to look away. This notorious pseudo-documentary marketed itself as banned in 40 countries, a claim that's probably as over the top as the footage itself. But make no mistake, Faces of Death freaked out censors and became the stuff of playground legend. The film's premise is simple but stomach-churning, a patchwork of staged and real footage depicting death, accidents, executions, and animal slaughter. Director John Allen Schwartz, credited as Conan LeSolaire, because of course he did, blurred the line between reality and shockumentary, splicing together grisly clips and pretending it was all 100% real. Word spread fast. Was this a snuff film? A government cover-up? The truth? A blend of real newsreel and plenty of gory Hollywood fakery. Authorities were not amused. Australia, Norway, and New Zealand quickly banned it, while video stores in the UK and US hid copies under the counter, away from prying parents. Teachers warned kids about it. Churches launched letter-writing campaigns, and urban legends flourished. Of course, this only made Faces of Death more alluring, a forbidden fruit for anyone with a VCR and a strong stomach. Despite the controversy, or more accurately because of it, Faces of Death became a cult sensation. It spawned sequels, knockoffs, and an entire subgenre of shockumentaries. Is it art? Hardly. But as a barometer of society's obsession with the macabre, nothing else comes close. Faces of Death is still whispered about in horror circles, proof that sometimes the most banned movies are the ones you're most tempted to see. The Exorcist, 1973. Forget the most banned horror movie title. The Exorcist is the gold standard for cinematic outrage, the movie that had audiences fainting, priests protesting, and censors in panic mode. When William Friedkin unleashed this tale of demonic possession on an unsuspecting public, he didn't just scare people, he sent them scrambling for the exits. Based on William Peter Blatty's bestseller, the film follows the possession of a young girl, Reagan, and the desperate attempts of two priests to save her soul. But it was the details that made headlines. Projectile vomiting, crucifix mutilation, obscene language spewing from a child's mouth. Word spread quickly that the set itself was cursed, as accidents and tragedies piled up during production. The backlash was swift and global. The film was banned, censored, or restricted in places like Singapore, Malaysia, and parts of the UK and US. Some theaters supplied barf bags. Ambulances waited outside screenings. The Catholic Church condemned it as spiritually dangerous, while evangelicals claimed the film itself was an invitation for demonic activity. Linda Blair, the film's teenage star, needed bodyguards because of the uproar. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, the controversy, The Exorcist became a box office phenomenon and the first horror film ever nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. Decades later, it's still the yardstick for supernatural shockers. If there's a movie that proves being banned can be the best marketing ever, this is it. Watch it alone if you dare. Caligula, 1979. If you want to see the collision between art house ambition and pure, unfiltered sleaze, buckle up for Caligula. Produced by penthouse magnate Bob Guccione and directed, at least in part, by Tinto Brass, this Roman epic assembled a cast of serious actors, Malcolm McDowell, Helen Mirren, Peter O'Toole, and then drenched them in wall-to-wall depravity, violence, orgies, political assassinations, you name it. Caligula didn't just cross the line, it erased it. The film's behind-the-scenes drama is as wild as what's on screen. Guccione secretly added unsimulated sex scenes after the main cast had finished, creating a cut so graphic that distributors all over the world recoiled in horror. Censors banned or severely cut the film in the UK, Canada, Australia, Italy, and several US states. Lawsuits erupted. In some places, the movie was prosecuted as obscene, with prints seized and destroyed. For the audience, Caligula was both a spectacle and a dare. Was it art, porn, or an unholy fusion of both? Critics were divided. Some called it a bold take on power and corruption. Others dismissed it as pure filth dressed in a toga. But the notoriety only made the curious line up for tickets, and over time, Caligula developed a cult following as the ultimate in so bad it's legendary cinema. The verdict? Caligula isn't just a banned movie. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when nobody says no. If you're searching for controversy in a toga, nothing tops this. The Wild Bunch, 1969-1970s bands. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch wasn't just a Western, it was a high-caliber bullet through the heart of Hollywood's old moral code. When it first hit theaters in 1969, audiences were stunned by the slow-motion carnage, unflinching violence, and nihilistic tone. The opening and closing shootouts are legendary. Guns blaze, blood sprays, and heroes die dirty. This wasn't John Wayne territory anymore. But the real fireworks began overseas. In the 1970s, as the film made its way to international screens, censors in the UK, Spain, and several Scandinavian countries decided The Wild Bunch was simply too brutal for civilized eyes. The controversy boiled over in the US too, with critics calling it savage, sadistic, and immoral. Church groups protested, politicians howled, audiences debated whether Peckinpah was condemning violence or just wallowing in it. Peckinpah didn't care. He was making a movie about men out of time, gunslingers lost in a world they no longer understood. He wanted viewers to feel every bullet, every betrayal. The censors' cuts only made the film seem more dangerous, more alluring. Over time, The Wild Bunch was reevaluated as a classic, praised for its artistry and influence on modern action films. But the bans and outrage lingered, marking it as the Western that changed everything. If you ever wondered why movie shootouts got so real in the decades that followed, look no further than this controversy magnet. Midnight Cowboy 1969, but banned into the 70s. When Midnight Cowboy premiered, it kicked open Hollywood's closet and showed America a side of itself that many weren't ready to see. This gritty, aching drama followed Joe Buck, a naive Texan hustler, as he drifted through the underbelly of New York City with a sickly conman named Ratso Rizzo. The film's frank depiction of homosexuality, sex work, and urban poverty rattled the censors and made history. The Motion Picture Association of America slapped the film with an X rating of first for a Best Picture winner, and several states either banned it outright or forced theaters to restrict access. Some southern cities refused to screen it, while others tried to cut key scenes. Internationally, bans and restrictions popped up in places like Ireland and Canada. Critics argued that Midnight Cowboy was dangerous, immoral, or both. Religious groups called for a boycott. But here's the twist. Controversy only boosted the movie's reputation. Audiences were moved by its raw humanity. Dustin Hoffman's unforgettable "I'm walking here" moment and the heartache pulsing beneath the grime. The film swept the Oscars and became a touchstone for a new, more honest kind of American cinema. Midnight Cowboy stands as proof that you can break taboos and still win Hollywood's highest honor. Sometimes what gets banned is exactly what people need to see. The American dream, it turns out, is a lot weirder and a lot more real than anyone imagined. So, what have we learned from this wild, forbidden ride through the most controversial movies of the 1970s? If history teaches us anything, it's that the harder you try to silence a film, the louder its legacy roars back. From censors in panic mode to cult audiences craving the forbidden, every movie on this list proved that banning a story doesn't kill it, it makes it immortal. Which of these banned classics shocked you most? Did we miss your favorite controversy magnet? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to share this video with a fellow film rebel. Because when it comes to cinema, the real danger isn't what we see, it's what we try to hide.